Come get some.
It was in December of 1997 that I played my first ever video game. I was 5, and I had gotten a Nintendo 64 for Christmas along with its flagship title, Super Mario 64. I consider myself lucky that my introduction to the wonderful world of gaming was via one of the greatest games ever made, and though it has since been surpassed by other games in the series, Super Mario 64 still holds up today. Games are one of the loves of my life. According to my Raptor profile, I spend over 24 hours each week playing them. On average, that's just under 4 hours per day, and I don't regret a single second, no matter what anyone tells you to the contrary. The video game is one of the 5 pillars of entertainment, along with film, music, television, and literature. And soon, games will be as integrated into modern culture as any of the others already mentioned. In my entire life so far, I have played over 250 games, finishing each at least once. I freely admit that I tend to be more lenient than most when it comes to judging their quality, but I think part of that stems from my love for the industry as a whole. That said, there are certain titles that I would wholeheartedly recommend to anyone, and of those, there are a few that I hold on a special pedestal, games that, in my humble opinion, are the best of the best, whose flaws are so outweighed by their merits as to be almost non-existent. Barring the use of multiple titles from the same series, these are my 20 favorite video games of all time. Music games are just not my cup of tea. It's not the fault of the actual games, mind, but of the fact that I generally dislike each and every song that the games have to offer. Not only does Dylan Fitterer's AudioSurf let you choose any sub 80-minute sound file on your computer, but it uploads your score to a global leaderboard, making any and every track you choose a worldwide struggle for supremacy. A stylish fusion of Rock Band, F-Zero, and Tetris, the different characters each boast a wholly unique style of gameplay. The versions of Mono offer the most basic experience, very reminiscent of the classic formula of simply hitting every colored note. Point Man encourages the grouping of similarly colored notes together, relying on the disappearance of clusters to gain points, and the notoriously difficult Double Vision requires keeping track of, as well as controlling, 2 ships at once. AudioSurf provides an experience for any mood for any length of time, seeing as it's only as intense or relaxing as you make it. It's not the most widely known music game, but for those who have played it, it retains a special place in their digital library. Though criticized by many as taking a hard turn into party game territory, No developer since has ever come close to replicating its unique gameplay style. It's a wonder that the idea of cooperative racing works at all, let alone that it is pulled off with such stylistic and mechanical panache. Each of the 20 playable characters has their own special attack, which harken back to the series' old days. Baby Mario and Luigi unleash the Chain Chomp from Super Mario 64, Donkey and Diddy Kong drop a giant banana peel, and Koopa and Paratroopa gain the classic Triple Shell. Furthermore, all 21 carts feature different balances of speed, acceleration, weight, and off-road capability, making the choice of characters and cart a highly tactical dilemma that is critical to the outcome of the race. But it's not these things that separate Double Dash from the rest of the kart racing pack. That honor falls to the innovative co-op system, putting 2 players into the same kart and forcing them to switch between driver and gunner on the fly. It takes quite a bit of getting used to, but pulling off a narrow victory in the 150cc Special Cup in this way is one of the most rewarding moments it is possible to have in a video game. It may be less of a racing game than its predecessors, but it exudes such unadulterated joy that this fact becomes lost in the sea of skid marks and blue shells.
Jesus. What the hell happened here? You hear that? I don't like this, man.
After 1 spin-off and 2 sequels, Crytek has still not managed to recapture the magic of its piece of 2007 technical wizardry. In fact, Crysis was so advanced at the time that even loading a level at the very high graphics preset was, quite literally, impossible, even with a set of the most powerful GPUs money could buy. Though the high system requirements restricted the number of customers at release and led to the game topping the piracy charts, Crysis's visual splendor can still amaze today, and will beat the hell out of many modern graphics cards. Despite receiving overall critical acclaim, Crysis was criticized by some as being a case of style over substance, but the truth is that this is an opinion held only by those who are poorly informed or are too focused on the narrative, as Crysis features some of the deepest gameplay ever seen in the genre. For emphasis, the least significant example of this is the very in-depth, on-the-fly weapon customization. At any time during gameplay, the player can bring up a simple, intuitive menu that lets them swap out sights, scopes, underbarrel attachments, suppressors, accuracy and visibility enhancing utilities, and even ammo types. This alone allows the player to utilize a large variety of tactics, but this pales in comparison to the series' signature Nano Suit, which offers enhancements to armor, speed, strength, and stealth. And while the possibility of charging in using speed and then flooring a Korean soldier with a strength-propelled oil drum might seem perfectly obvious, the suit has more subtle uses as well. For instance, equipping strength while looking through a scope steadies your aim dramatically, and using speed boost decreases the time it takes to aim down the sight, reload, and switch weapons. Frankly, the number of options players have to approach and survive each enemy encounter is baffling, and leads to no 2 playthroughs ever being the same. Maximum game, indeed. During the long wait for The Last Guardian, anyone wishing to experience video games as an art form needs to pick up Shadow of the Colossus, preferably the much improved PS3 HD make. Instantly accessible to newbies and veterans alike, and sporting a simple and provocative storyline, perhaps the worst attribute of Team Ico's sophomore effort is how hard it is to write about. Boss battles have been in video games almost from their inception, but no game ever handled the concept like this. Each of the 16 levels in Shadow of the Colossus consists of a single, awe-inspiring encounter with one of the majestic colossi. But the game does a brilliant thing, one of a great many. None of the gigantic beasts show any kind of hostility towards the game's hero, Wander, without being attacked first. Hearing each colossus scream as their weak points are ruthlessly stabbed brings a feeling of overwhelming guilt that runs contrary to an act that is, by its very nature, designed to bring satisfaction to the player. In fact, it seems like everything about this title was designed solely to make players feel small and insignificant. Other than the colossi, Wander's loyal steed Agro, and a type of lizard whose population can be counted on your hands, the game's wondrous setting is utterly devoid of life, leading to a sense of isolation and despair that threatens to become overwhelming, a feeling that the defeat of the 16th and final Colossus does nothing to mitigate. As the story reaches its conclusion, the player is left to ponder whether their actions were worth the emotional price they paid. This is a question that only video games are capable of answering, and none have ever dared to ask it so directly. Ever since its debut on the 3DO, the Need for Speed series has been through innumerable ups and downs. It has become the single best-selling racing franchise of all time, been in the hands of over 10 different developers, and has entries in every racing subgenre, including 2 MMOs. And while the series' 2005 entry didn't really break any new ground, it is still considered the pinnacle of the franchise among series diehards, and it isn't entirely difficult to see why. Featuring a storyline that perfectly straddled the line between camp and class and told through awesomely self-aware CG cutscenes, the game always provided just enough incentive for players to keep working their way up the blacklist. Car customization was the deepest it had ever been at the time, with modifications available for virtually every part of the car, from the speedometer to the exhaust pipes, and the pursuits remain unmatched in terms of urgency and skill required to outrun the law. Hot Pursuit can keep its EMP blasts and supersonic turbo boosts. In Most Wanted, the only way you were going to make a clean getaway was through knowledge of the lay of the land and thoughtful use of nitrous and the destructible environment. Top all this off with a fantastic sense of speed and a precise handling model, and you have the Need for Speed game by which all others are judged.
Open the CRC room door.
¡Aquí vienen! ¡Contraataque!
On one edge of the Nuketown 2025 multiplayer map, there is a small greenhouse, with plants being watered by a sprinkler system that moves along a track on the ceiling, never ceasing its back and forth movement through the entirety of the match. It's little touches like this that draw you into the Call of Duty franchise's most fully realized world to date. Ever since Call of Duty 4 changed the industry forever, Treyarch is the studio that has been taking all the chances and all the risks. leaving Infinity Ward to continue making only minor improvements every 2 years. But it's not the creativity Treyarch put into its dark vision of the near future that makes Black Ops 2 the best entry in the controversial series. It's that it is the biggest, most thoughtful, and most innovative installment since 2007's Modern Warfare. The innovations begin with the campaign. Black Ops 2's single player is hands down the best the series has to offer. More open battlefields allow for some degree, however small, of player freedom, which is amplified by the player's ability to choose their loadout before each mission. In addition to presenting more options in combat, it's strangely humorous to bring a fully customized future weapon to a 1980s gunfight. And then of course, there's the franchise debut of non-linear storytelling. Based on various choices made by the player throughout the thoroughly compelling narrative, no fewer than 6 different endings are available upon completion of the game. All this, and I haven't even mentioned the multiplayer. Treyarch did an excellent job of building each map with a minimum of camping spots, almost managing to make untouchable snipers a thing of the past. And then there's the brilliant pick 10 system, forcing every player onto the same level, Twitch skill notwithstanding. And in the interest of time, I'll gloss over the addictive zombies mode, which became so popular that it even spawned its own self-contained narrative. The most expansive and consistently fun installment so far, Black Ops 2 is the quintessential Call of Duty experience. Despite being one of the smaller AAA developers in the industry, id Software's legendary reputation and legacy endure to this day. Having created the first-person shooter genre and delivered the first online FPS multiplayer, the games industry owes more than it will ever know to the small, Texas-based studio. When Halo Combat Evolved redefined the FPS in 2001, id soon realized that people were no longer interested in the fast-paced, old-school style of game that they had developed in the past. So, in an indescribably risky move, id took its most beloved franchise and turned it upside down for the new generation. Of course, many elements from the earlier Dooms remained, such as the unlimited inventory, lack of regenerating health, hidden Easter eggs, and all the classic weapons and enemies. But gone was the colorful, relentlessly over-the-top gameplay and timeless visual style. In their place, id set up a gorgeous, dark, and atmospheric shooter, in which supplies were so scarce that the game bordered on survival horror. Yes, there were far too many jump scares, but Doom 3 presented such a palpable sense of dread that the two almost balanced each other out. Like Crysis 3 years later, Doom 3's highest graphics settings were out of reach of 2004's most advanced PC hardware, leading to an unprecedented wave of graphics card sales. In another bold step, id put a heavy focus on the narrative, giving Mars City and its denizens a fairly deep history that was explored through the very well-written and acted audio reports. However, the core gameplay remained virtually unchanged from Doom 3's 1995 predecessor, leaving critics and players divided. Some felt that this was essential to remain true to the game's rich legacy, while others thought that the lack of evolution clashed too harshly with the updated presentation. Based on its inclusion on this list, you should be able to guess which camp I'm in. The perfect bridge between the old and new. Doom 3 remains id's best single-player title, and stands as a prime example of how to revamp a series for a new audience. 2004 was a huge year for the shooter genre. Every single platform had at least one major FPS release that year. The PC had Doom 3, Far Cry, and Half-Life 2. The GameCube had Metroid Prime 2, the PS2 had Killzone, and the Xbox, of course, had Halo 2. And while Halo's multiplayer made it the most important of the group, it was Valve's much anticipated sequel that took the crown as the best, an adventure that excelled in almost every area. Its most obvious improvement was the new physics engine, something that Valve took every opportunity to show off, marking not only a remarkable technical achievement, but using that achievement as an integral part of the gameplay. Like Doom 3, Half-Life 2 allowed every weapon to be carried at once, and the core mechanics were virtually identical to its predecessor, Gravity Gun aside. But the gameplay was not what made Half-Life 2 one of the greatest games ever made. That honor fell to almost everything else about the game. The sharp writing, terrifying atmosphere, incredible art direction, Hollywood-quality voice acting, and engrossing storyline. The universe Valve had created was nothing short of astounding, and the developer remains unmatched in its ability to tell a wordless story using nothing but the Source Engine's expansive library of assets. Players who looked at each locale closely enough were rewarded with countless subplots, often touchingly told with nothing but blood, bullet holes, and overturned couches. Players want Half-Life 3 not for the next evolution of the genre, but for one last chance to marvel at Valve's unmatched talent of merging story with technology to create some of the classiest games in history. The first Assassin's Creed was a minor groundbreaker, heralding the return of the stealth genre and telling a multi-layered story within a wonderfully realized world. Ultimately, however, the bland main character, sheer repetitiveness of the mission design, and abrupt ending kept a good game from achieving greatness. Fast forward 2 years, however, and Ubisoft Montreal had crafted Assassin's Creed 2, a sequel that was superior to the original in every conceivable way. Moving from the Middle East to Europe got rid of the monochromatic desert locales, giving way to vibrant cityscapes bursting with color, denizens, and side missions. That latter detail, along with the streamlined story structure, effectively eliminated the first game's biggest flaw. The main story path no longer consisted of having to perform the same mundane tasks over and over again to clear a path to the target. Each memory was now its own self-contained concoction of writing, combat, and sneaking that added tangible weight to the player's actions. 2 also served to introduce the gaming world to Ezio Auditore, to this day the series' most beloved protagonist, as well as to famous faces from history that would become a series staple. Machiavelli, Pope Alexander VI, and Leonardo da Vinci each left impressions that characters from the first could only dream of. Even the present-day storyline got a facelift, fleshing out the characters to the point of acceptance by the majority of players, as well as ending on a nail-biting cliffhanger that neatly paved the way for future installments. There may have been even more bodies in the streets, but to this day, Assassin's Creed has never felt so alive. In Street Fighter IV, for example, there is said to be a good amount of variation between the characters. Their playstyles are different, of course, as are their looks, but each and every one of them relies solely on kicks, punches, kick-punch combos, and the occasional Hadouken. Every character in Super Smash Bros. Brawl also has punches, kicks, and combos. But this is a game in which a Hadouken equivalent can be accessed by a single button press, in which the stages are often as deadly as the combatants, and whose matches make all other fighters look quaint and boring by comparison. But what's truly amazing isn't the number of throwbacks to Nintendo's rich history. It isn't the utterly addictive online coin gambling feature. It isn't the surprisingly lengthy Subspace Emissary campaign mode. It isn't even the impossibly huge number of unlockables. 1,481 to be exact. Yes, there are 1,481 unlockable items in this game. No, what makes Brawl a true marvel of video game design is that, despite every character having its own completely unique style of gameplay, they are all perfectly balanced. In addition to their standard fisticuffs and special moves, each character now has access to a show-stopping final smash, ranging from an instant KO sword strike to a giant octopus. And though many fans of the series maintain that these changes ruin the balance, Brawl's mind-blowing number of match customization options allow players to play any type of game they wish. Want a 30-second sudden death with each character starting with 900% damage? Done. Don't like smash attacks? Disable them. Do you think that skill alone should prevail? Turn off item drops. I could go on, but the point is that Brawl offers something for everyone, and is easily worth the additional price of 4 GameCube controllers. Despite the earlier disclaimer, I have played my fair share of fighting games, and of those that I have played, Soul Calibur 2 is not only the most accessible, but also, put simply, the most fun. Each fight is infused with an energy that makes the spectacularly flashy moves that are on display seem like something out of the greatest martial arts classics, regularly cutting to cinematic camera angles to give the best view of the carnage. What's cool is that the effect of any character's moves can be radically altered based on what weapon they're holding. Acquired via shops in the awesome single-player mode Weapon Master, each tool of destruction possesses a variety of traits that can be used to make a character more balanced or more focused on their default strengths. These traits are as numerous as the weapons themselves, ranging from enhanced speed and stronger defense to health vampirism and weaker unarmed moves. The choice of weapon is often as important as that of the wielder and can easily change the tide of battle. Fast, beautiful, and elegant, and despite 3 sequels and its various competitors, Soul Calibur 2 retains the arguable title of the best 3D fighting game ever made.
You got the touch. You got the power. Yeah! After all.
Too many developers seem to forget that players don't always want to experience a gut-wrenching story or be dazzled by the visuals. Like films, video games are made first and foremost for the purpose of entertaining customers. And of the hundreds of games I've played, Saints Row 4 is the most entertaining of the bunch by a considerable margin. After the sleeper hit of Saints Row the Third, the team at Volition decided to take everything they had ever wanted to do in a Saints Row game and put it into one. The sheer creativity on display here is ridiculous, and there is little to do that isn't fun in some way. For instance, although it effectively eliminates the need for vehicles, sprinting around at superhuman speed through the streets and up the sides of buildings provides a carefree exhilaration that never loses any of its potency. The new abilities and weapons also reflect the franchise's newfound lack of boundaries. In the third, the signature weapon was a giant purple dildo, capable of making enemies explode into a shower of blood and meat. Fun, without a doubt. Misogynistic and repulsive, also without doubt. Compare this to 4's ingenious dubstep gun, just as entertaining, without serving as a reflection of the game's worst qualities. There's just too much awesome to talk about in a timely manner. The story is genuinely touching at times, the dialogue is impeccable and often hilarious, and the set pieces are outrageous at a level that Call of Duty can only dream of attaining. It's a game that's in love with both other games and being one itself, serving as a salute to the industry that Volition is clearly in awe of. It's intoxicating, and represents a reminder of what it truly means to be a video game. The Mario platforming series has always been bursting with innocence and charm, and Galaxy 2 is no exception. However, it's the sheer variety of the stages that makes it such a joy to play. Unless replaying a level, you'll never face the same challenge twice. I don't know how Nintendo does it, nor am I entirely sure I want to know, but it's this stratospheric level of creativity and imagination that makes it the single greatest game developer of all time. Nintendo knows that you've played a Mario title before, and the level design reflects this. After the initial handful of tutorial stages, the game will test your platforming skills to their absolute limit. Static platforms are a rarity to be taken full advantage of, because without the occasional breather, the constant challenge had the potential to overwhelm. More than any other title in the series, Super Mario Galaxy 2 celebrates the history of the most important interactive franchise of all time, but does so without rehashing familiar locations and puzzles, as the surprisingly numerous 2D sections shine just as brightly as their 3D counterparts. Though the motion controls can get finicky on occasion, this is perhaps the game's only true flaw, and one that isn't even the game's fault. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is the definitive Mario platformer, and a sublime experience by any standard. And to think that Naughty Dog was once the Crash Bandicoot factory. Beginning with 2007's Uncharted Drake's Fortune, the company reinvented itself as Sony's go-to action-adventure studio. Since then, the developer has not released a game that could be called anything less than great. But even amidst this enviable pedigree, Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, manages to stand out. David Cage can stick to his pretentious QTE fests. If you want cinema in video game form, look no further. Everything about Among Thieves tells of sky-high production values, smart game design, and passion for creating characters that are among the most realistic the industry has ever seen. It says something that Uncharted 2 features a love triangle that manages to not be soapy and eye-rolling. This is thanks to the fact that these people are so well written and acted that something happens that only a tiny handful of games can rightfully claim to have repeated. They become more than the sum of their parts, no longer mere pixels and sound bites. At this point, had the gameplay been wholly unremarkable, Uncharted 2 would still be something special. But Naughty Dog went the extra mile to ensure that their adventure epic was as fun to play as to watch. The cover-based shooting and fluid movement of the characters is superb, with an impeccable animation system and diverse locations from around the world that each managed to cram in more wow moments than most games do in their entirety. Coupled with the great graphics and a pitch-perfect score by Firefly composer Greg Edmondson, Uncharted 2 stands tall as not only the best exclusive title on the PlayStation 3, but arguably the most improved sequel the industry has ever seen. When Nintendo announced that the first Metroid title in 2 console generations would be played from a first-person perspective, the outcry was probably loud enough to be heard all the way to Zeebs. The fears ranged from the idea that it was going to turn into a pure shooter to the stigma that, if it wasn't, first-person platforming had never been done well up to that point. But when Retro Studios released the GameCube exclusive Metroid Prime in November 2002, the screams of rage morphed into gasps of shock and awe. Not only was Metroid Prime not a first-person shooter, and not only did the platforming work perfectly, but it was a great game. And not only was it a great game, it tied the record for the most highly scored game at the time, and was considered by some to be the best Metroid title to date. For the first time, players were able to literally step into the shoes, or Variasuit as it were, of Samus Aran and square off against the space pirates in full 3D on Talon 4, to this day one of the most painstakingly crafted game worlds ever. From the get-go, it was clear that exploration, not combat, was the star of the show. Though many shooter fans decried the combat for its lack of free aiming and free movement, it allowed players to scale their surroundings while keeping their weapon trained on enemies at all times. Secrets were everywhere. Hidden missile expansions were tucked away in the damnedest places, daring players to try for that 100% completion statistic. Also scattered around the planet was the surprisingly detailed backstory, describing the origins and downfall of the Chozo, the alien race responsible for both raising the orphan Samus and the creation of her signature suit. Once players figured out how to maneuver Samus in directions other than left and right, they were greeted with a title that was unquestionably Metroid. Similar to what id would do 2 years later, Retro Studios managed to successfully revamp a classic, turning it into something that outgrew its heritage without disregarding it. Perhaps more so than any other video game franchise, The Legend of Zelda is synonymous with quality. For almost 30 years, Nintendo has enthralled gamers with the adventures of Link's endless quest to save Princess Zelda from the evil Ganondorf. And apart from the infamous CDI incarnation, every single entry in the series has been hailed as a classic, praised for their freedom of exploration, inimitable charm, and deviously constructed dungeons. And to celebrate the series' 25th anniversary, Nintendo, with much fanfare, released Skyward Sword, the first installment made specifically for the Wii. And that simple fact made all the difference. Using the required Wii Motion Plus, the combat in Skyward Sword consists of sword fighting that mirrors the player's chops and slashes with almost one-to-one precision. Being able to hit an enemy vertically, have him block, and then finish him with a horizontal slice underneath his upturned defenses is as revolutionary as Link's first 3D swing in Ocarina of Time. And even after 30 hours, it never gets old. But when your box art sports a logo boasting a quarter century's worth of acclaimed predecessors, you have to have more than fancy sword moves. And at first, it would appear that not only does Skyward Sword not respect its past, but mock it. The prime example of this is the puzzles. Prior Zelda games were full of predicaments requiring box pushing and key hunting, which even die-hard fans would admit became tiresome. In Skyward Sword, these have been replaced with the need to use logic along with various pieces of your inventory to make real progress, feeling more reminiscent of Portal than, say, Majora's Mask. But that's what makes Skyward Sword so brilliant. It's not a celebration of 25 years of The Legend of Zelda. It's a celebration of only the best attributes of those years, making it, in many ways, the ultimate Zelda title, and coming from where it does, that is a truly unbelievable feat.
What in the world is... All right. Looks like they expect me to sit in their fancy chair. So now... What the hell? Go!
Make yourself ready, Pilgrim. The bindings are there as a safeguard.
No, no, God damn it!
Ascension. Ascension in the count of 5. Count of 4.
No.
3, 2, 1.
No!
Ascension. Ascension.
Just stay calm.
5,000 feet. 10,000 feet. 15,000 feet. Hallelujah.
I have described my 2013 Game of the Year as the best single-player shooter I have ever played, and it's true. Irrational Swansong is everything one could want in an FPS campaign. Unmatched art direction, exhilarating combat, flexible encounter spaces, a large variety of enemies, and a peerless storyline. From the first second, Infinite pulls players into its beautifully twisted experience, never letting go until the main menu reappears. For the first half hour, you never even pick up a weapon, unless you choose to take your chances at the Carnival Airgun booth, and are left to explore the city at your leisure. And then, all of a sudden, this idyllic utopia becomes a living hell.
Show them what we got planned, boys!
In a scene of shocking brutality, the people that had, just minutes ago, welcomed you with open arms are united against you, all in overzealous loyalty to Father Comstock. Well, almost all. Once Booker meets Elizabeth, everything changes. The gameplay opens up, unlocking a wealth of tactical options to choose from in each battle. The majority of the vigors are introduced. Coupled with the quick respawn system, this allows for endless experimentation with different combinations of tears, guns, and powers. and the story goes from search and rescue to one of survival and discovery. And in a crucial improvement over its 2007 predecessor, Infinite does not lose momentum at this point. On the contrary, the arrival of Elizabeth galvanizes both you and the world she lives in, ceaselessly gaining energy until the final battle has been won. And then comes the ending, unquestionably one of the most brilliant in the history of fiction, so shocking and meaningful that each and every detail of a second playthrough is cast in a new light. An accomplished and confident piece of software, BioShock Infinite has set the bar for story-driven shooters. On November 15, 2001, Bungie released Halo Combat Evolved. On that day, the first-person shooter genre was changed forever. Gone were the player character's limitless back strength and static health meter that had been the universal norm. The shooter had become thoughtful and tactical, and Bungie improved on that winning formula every 3 years for the next 9. And in 2010, Halo's creators released their final entry in the series. But despite serving as a prequel to the original game, Halo Reach was a sequel in the truest sense, an evolution and perfection of the revolutionary mechanics that made the first Halo so important. Halo 3's equipment shook things up by offering new opportunities to change the way encounters played out, but they just didn't gel with the core gameplay as well as they could have. With Reach, Bungie turned the equipment into rechargeable, multi-use armor abilities, such as sprinting, the first time the series has allowed the player to do so, cloaking, a deployable shield, a hologram decoy, and of course, a jetpack. In both the campaign and multiplayer, the chances to change which one you have equipped are few and far between, forcing players to choose and adapt. This, in turn, allowed them to learn the strengths and weaknesses of the various weapons, and learn the lay of the land to take advantage of in the future. Put simply, it made people better players, but this was hardly the extent of the improvements. In the campaign, Bungie brought the focus closer to the characters, and even though said characters were pretty one-note, especially compared to those in other games, the effort was a welcome one, and perfectly complemented the spectacular set pieces and somber tone. Reach's single player is the second best the series has seen, trumped only by Halo 4, but it is in the multiplayer where the game's true genius is revealed, with sublime map design, a perfectly balanced armory, and a mile-long list of modes and match customization options that truly let players play whatever they wanted. And Firefight made a triumphant return, with the crucial addition of online matchmaking that turned ODST's cooperative novelty into an essential part of the experience. All this, coupled with Forge and save films, makes Halo Reach the biggest, most comprehensive first-person shooter ever made, the crown jewel in the genre's most influential series.
This is the Pillar of Autumn. We're away.
There's a reason people are so excited for Shinji Mikami's The Evil Within. It's because the last time the famed pioneer of survival horror made a game in the genre, it was Resident Evil 4. The title's troubled development began even before Code Veronica was released. During its development cycle, not only were 2 other mainline Resident Evil games created, but 4 different versions of RE4 had been created and rejected. In 2002, the legendary Capcom 5 were announced, and once all 4 of the games had been released by June 2005, one of them, Dead Phoenix, never saw the light of day. Resident Evil 4 was deservedly regarded as the greatest of the group. Like Metroid Prime, it represented a classic franchise evolving for the new generation. The player was no longer stuck with fixed camera angles in each area. Instead, they followed Leon S. Kennedy, the main protagonist of Resident Evil 2, in a dynamic third-person view. And when aiming, the camera zoomed in over his shoulder to give a clearer and closer view of the action. This aiming system was a revolution, and nowadays it's all but impossible to find a third-person action game that doesn't have you aiming over the protagonist's shoulders, be it Gears of War, Uncharted, or Crackdown. As is the norm with changes such as this, there was a large number of naysayers maintaining that the series had moved away from being survival horror. This was simply not true. Mikami boldly decided to keep the old-school tank controls in the game, as well as the lack of supplies. Though this makes it harder for gamers today to accept Resident Evil 4, it was invaluable in giving fans something to hold on to. And despite Leon's obvious technological advantage over his enemies, it ultimately didn't matter. To compensate for the higher degree of aiming precision, enemies would frequently bob and weave just as players would get a beat on them, or, even more deviously, would simply walk up from behind. This need for constant vigilance made every battle a very tense affair, exacerbated by the astonishing array of combat scenarios, the El Gigante fight, the terrifying face-off with Del Lago, and the pivotal point in the story after which headshots actually make enemies more dangerous. Resident Evil 4 is a modern classic, one that will be played and loved for as long as Capcom keeps porting it. It's a monstrous and unforgettable epic. As one of only 2 games on this list to bring me to tears, you know that Portal 2 is something very special. 4 years after the release of the first game, the sequel not only lived up to the original, but surpassed it in almost every respect. Using an updated source engine allowed for fancier effects and nicer textures. A multitude of new puzzle pieces were introduced, each one increasing the intricacy of the test chambers at a pace that kept them challenging without rushing through the introductions of the new tools. But the writing is what ultimately elevates the sequel over the first game. GLaDOS makes a triumphant return, highlighted by a touching transformation from enemy to reluctant ally. The new character of Wheatley is probably the best companion the player could have. Never without a witty comment to lighten the mood, always flawlessly delivered by Stephen Merchant, he is what props up the first half's more upbeat tone. Players even got to meet, or more accurately listen to, the founder of Aperture Science himself, Cave Johnson. J.K. Simmons plays it straight as an arrow, only magnifying the comedic effect of his numerous monologues. The much-anticipated cooperative campaign was equally brilliant, which chose to let the comedy spring not from GLaDOS's quips, but from the actions of the players themselves. Propelling your partner into the bottomless depths or misplacing a portal critical to your progress never failed to bring a smile.
I swear to God, if I fucking walk over there and that shit closes on me, I'm gonna go outside, find a homeless man, pay him money to come here and take a dump in your sink. What the f-
And even if you and your teammate were unable to communicate verbally, the built-in gestures were quite sufficient to explain your intentions. It's actually very difficult to think of something Portal 2 doesn't do right. And even if players get bored of the on-disk puzzles, the integration with Steam Workshop ensures a steady stream of new and innovative test chambers from the constantly active community. But no matter what platform you play it on, once you're done, you'll realize the truth. Portal 2 represents Valve at the top of their game, and that the developers' future products have truly gargantuan shoes to fill.
I don't take orders from you anymore, remember?
Consider yourself reinstated, Commander. You know what you have to do.
I'll be back for you, and I'll bring every fleet I can. Good luck.
You too, Shepard.
Those who know me personally will have seen this coming from miles away, but for those who don't, let me explain why one of the most controversial games of our time is at the top of my list. The first Mass Effect is a great game, held back from excellence by god-awful inventory management and bland combat, but propped up by the deep character customization and world-class writing. Mass Effect 2 drastically reduced the customization options and focus on backstory, which left a handful of fans feeling cheated. But for everyone else, the more fleshed out characters and improved combat more than made up for these shortcomings. To my knowledge, it is also the very first video game that changed based on the choices made in its predecessor. This was something that had simply not been done before during any console generation. This remarkable feature resulted in BioWare spearheading the advancement of video game storytelling. During Mass Effect 1, there were a good number of major choices that received little to no acknowledgement in Mass Effect 2, and those who remembered what those were eagerly holding their breath in anticipation of the final chapter, the game that would bring together every major decision from the first and second games. Finally, on March 6, 2012, Mass Effect 3 officially launched. Divisive ending notwithstanding, it was generally agreed that BioWare had delivered an extraordinary conclusion to what is arguably gaming's greatest trilogy. Mass Effect 2 was a dark game, The Empire Strikes Back to ME1's A New Hope. But it was nothing compared to its successor. In Mass Effect 3, the Reapers had finally invaded the galaxy. Even after hearing about them and seeing brief glimpses of their incredible power, they still made for hugely intimidating adversaries. Seeing a 3-mile-tall robotic squid firing lasers onto a distant battlefield was nerve-wracking enough, but the sound that they emitted, a subwoofer-busting mechanical shriek.
ETA 3 minutes.
Made these ancient machines indescribably, viscerally terrifying. And it wasn't just your enemies that received an audio makeover. BioWare worked closely with DICE to make sure that the vast array of fully customizable weaponry packed a hard punch, which only made the upgraded combat system that much more satisfying. In addition, DICE programmed the positioning of the surround sound, which led to a universe that felt that much more real. And what a universe it was, striking the perfect balance between ME1's scale and 2's intimacy. Mass Effect 3's storyline was flawlessly executed, combining good old-fashioned revelations and drama with artful commentary on the consequences of war and the nature of choice in video games. But none of this was especially surprising. Everyone knew that the developers at BioWare were masters of interactive storytelling, so anything less than excellence would have been rejected right out of the gate. What Mass Effect 3 did, what no one could possibly have predicted, was to include a multiplayer suite that was not only tolerable, but truly great in its own right, with each of the 30 or so character classes boasting their own vast skill trees. Players were given the option to customize their characters to a degree rivaling that of Mass Effect 2, with objectives that changed each wave, and the full array of enemies from the single player, as well as a few more. Mass Effect 3's cooperative mode was the best of its kind since Bungie had introduced Firefight 3 years earlier. On its own, Mass Effect 3 is a triumph, a combination of technology, connectivity, gameplay, and writing that is quite unlike anything else, but as a sequel, as well as a goodbye, it is uncannily close to perfection. The simple act of leaving behind this incredible universe, and its even more remarkable denizens, makes for countless moments of emotion that are unmatched by any other game in history. But this universe was different for each and every player. A character, a ship, and even an entire species may be existent for one player, but long dead for another. I'm at a loss for words to describe just how special this game, never mind the entire trilogy, actually is. Mass Effect 3 is a sweeping, powerful, and hugely emotional journey. Its scale is unmatched, its storytelling prowess is second to none, and it is, beyond a shadow of doubt, my favorite video game of all time.
all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fell to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've loved, they'd wished me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should, I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy